This is the regular March meeting of the Wyoming Board of Education. I'm calling this meeting to order. May I have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Broderick? Here. Mr. Buckner?
Here.
Mr. Thomas?
Here.
Mrs. G? Here. Mrs. Aller?
Here. Please join me in the pledge. There you go, Karen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, thank you. Recognition of the public, Mrs. Henke, do we have any? All right, so we do not have any recognition of the public, so we're going to move on to, we have two special presentations today. We're eagerly waiting to hear these, so let's move right into them. CAC,
Yeah.
go for it.
Yeah. We are excited to have our CAC team that's been focused on bullying and best practices to prevent bullying violence from being created and to help us address the behaviors of bullying as we see those things happen. And so I will turn it over to our team. And I don't know if Shannon, is that going to be you kicking it off for us today?
I'm going to introduce everybody.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
Oh, I don't even need a clicker. I'm just introducing.
I know, I'm in the way.
Actually, if you wouldn't mind, then the recording will pick up
Is this for
better. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
And I have notes. My team has the credentials that I need to. So first we have Mr. Ernest Davis, who is a part of our team who moved to Wyoming from Chicago in August, who has a son at the middle school. And he is an independent consultant for community psychology practice. We also have our leader, Shannon Myatt, who has lived in Wyoming for 5 years and has a 7th, 9th, and 10th grader in Wyoming and is a nurse practitioner at Children's Hospital. Cindy Peeble is a CPA, CGMA, executive financial strategist, has a stepdaughter in college and a daughter at the high school. Has also volunteered with a lot of different organizations in Wyoming, Junior Achievement, Girl Scouts, Inroads, and the Wyoming DE&I Task Force. And I am Haley Parks. I am the counselor at the middle school. It's my 2nd year in Wyoming, and it's been lovely to be here. So, and our other leader, Dr. Pasha. I'm the resource, not the leader. Always the leader. But that is our. We were the anti-bullying.
Thank you, very glad we get to do this. This is my 2nd year on CAC. Quite different than all the virtual things that we got to do last year with school start time. So definitely different. But grateful to share what we learned with the very abstract idea of trying to create an anti-bullying culture in the schools. We plan to revisit or define bullying based on what Wyoming City Schools policy says, as well as review current strategies, provide information about other school districts, common themes within other schools, and then just some potential areas of improvement for Wyoming. And then throughout it, we'll have our recommendations.
And I just to share, I did put a copy of this in front of you. So yep. So you can see, yep. These are the same. Yes, they're the same.
I think they're the same. One's just the one up for us, so in case you're like, just figure that out. Okay.
All right, according to Wyoming City Schools policy, bullying is defined as any intentional, written, verbal, electronic, or physical threat act that a student or group of students exhibits towards another particular group of students. The key things for this is that it happens more than once. It can cause both mental and physical harm. And that was written in December of 2013. But last year, the definition was revised. I'm not sure if you guys were all involved in that process, but it looks like there was more information that wanted to be teased out to make it more specific. So bullying, as defined for April 2021, includes more things: unlawful harassment when one or more persons inflict physical or psychological distress on other students or employees. This includes protected classes this time around, as well as unwanted and repeated written, verbal, and physical behavior. More importantly, it teased out the specifics of like teasing and threats and intimidation, stalking, cyberstalking, and cyberbullying. In addition, the policy defines harassment. So that's threatening, insulting, dehumanizing gestures, providing reasonable fear or harm. And these include both students and staff. And then also interfering with just educational performance, opportunities or benefits. And then also includes disrupting the orderly operations of school. So those are very detailed definitions, but I think the take home for us, looking at all the definitions of bullying, is that the important thing is bullying, harassment, intimidation, and mean behavior is what the student who receives the treatment believes it to be, and therefore should be addressed. So I do think it's important to have definitions, and I know that was one of our major charges for this work was to define bullying. But I think the big piece is just understanding that it depends on how the student feels, and the actions that are taken afterwards should be based on the person who's being treated unfairly or in a way that doesn't make them feel comfortable at school. But we always have to have some type of data. It's not a lot of data, I think, with creating a culture. But what we did learn is that 1 in 5 students feel like they're being bullied in school, per the National Center of Educational Statistics in 2019. That's a pretty big number, 1 in 5, 22%. Those could be rumors, or being made fun of, being called names, insulted, excluded from activities on purpose, being pushed, threatened with harm, made to do things that they didn't want to do, or having their property destroyed on purpose. When we think about 1 in 5, kind of makes us think about what was happening here in Wyoming. Our policy requires that we specifies that a report will be provided to the Board of Education president and published on the district website. And in 2021, like last school year, 2020 to 2021, there's only 1 verified incident of bullying. So the list of cases that did not meet bullying criteria were not available on the website. So of the things that happened, only the ones that are verified were reported, so we don't know how many of the unverified cases there are. And it brought us to look at what other schools do. And so other schools kind of show a little bit more data. They include what's reported, but also what's addressed or what's verified or what's validated, and not just that final validated report. For example, we see Madeira had about 5 reported incidences in 2020, and only 1 was validated. And so CPS, definitely a bigger, difficult comparison. Shows kind of the same idea. You can have up to 22 reported, but only 15 are substantiated. And we also looked at Fairfield City Schools and those Oak Hills. Just a thought, when we think about how many cases of these are happening, we saw in our data that about 1 in 5 students report something like that. So here in Wyoming, the process is either a formal complaint or informal complaint. Informal complaints provide more of a prompt resolution with a range of options. So if something happens that the student or staff notifies another supervisor or administration, and the process is moved along. A formal complaint is usually results in a formal investigation, and based on the outcome of that investigation, we'll determine if that is reported. So it could be a formal investigation that says that it's not substantiated. We still would know about the report if it's not publicly posted on the website. Anyone can submit a complaint, and all complaints are either put in the student file if they're verified, or they're put in the general disciplinary file if they're not verified. And formal complaints should be made within 30 days of the event, and that's just to make sure that the details of the event are fresh in the brains of the people who are involved. So that brings us to our first recommendation. Provide public reports of all reported episodes of bullying, harassment, and intimidation versus only those that are the verified number of incidences for Wyoming city policy. So similar to what we saw with the other schools, just seeing how many actual reports are coming to administration versus just the ones that are validated. And this will help determine the extent of the problem and improve areas where and to the whom the intervention will be most effective. So then we move on to Safer Ohio Tech Hotline. And this is something that we started here in Wyoming this school year. It's a tip line that allows students and adults to anonymously share information with school officials regarding things that may be occurring in the school. So it could be something that's either a threat to a large amount of people or even an individual threat. It's an anonymous reporting option and it's monitored 24/7 by the Homeland Security. And then the Ohio Safety Center partners with the Ohio Department of Education to make sure that the schools are notified or if something needs to be done, that they have the information to do so. And again, this was just started this school year. We received information at the start of the school year. Our second recommendation is to increase awareness of the Safety Tip Hotline by providing information to students and families at the start of the school year and then again at the start of the second semester. And this is because at the start of the school year, we all know we get lots of information. And it might be there, but it might not be in the forefront of our brain when we're kind of getting everything in place for school. But by the start of the second semester, if things are happening throughout the school and throughout the first semester, then being reminded that this is an option is super helpful for families. The hope is that the families are comfortable talking to administration, right? We'd rather them talk to the school staff and leadership, without being anonymous. And if they're not comfortable doing that, this is a great option for people to be able to utilize to share any concerns they may have. So next, we actually chatted with a couple of schools, at least 5 in this area, and some out in California and Indiana and Columbus. But we asked them pretty much the same 5 questions regarding tracking, training for anti-bullying management, positive behavior systems, addressing bullying, and then trying to discuss restorative practices. So the next few slides are just a summary of those conversations. We spoke with the bullying and harassment officer in Fairfield, which is also they have a position that just handles that. Which is very helpful in just explaining their process and all the reports are tracked in the student record. They have a required anti-bullying harassment training that's done every year, both online and individual. And we also utilize a variety of PD days to do their training. They have Hope Squad, which we will talk about in a little while, but they utilize that for high school and for middle school. They introduce it to the 5th graders as they prep, so they can be ready when they go to 6th grade. In addition, the elementary school has a counselor who meets with students twice a month regarding bullying and time allowance and staffing allowance. And then they utilize PBIS to support the positive behavior system and reinforce acceptable behavior. They also do like community-wide mental health conferences, similar to what we did this year. And they do not have a current restorative practices plan. Forest Hills Anderson, their track, we talked with the counselor there, and the track process is not clear from handled by assistant principal. They previously used the council on child abuse to provide classroom lessons surrounding bullying and harassment, and they don't probably use them now, but that was their go-to. They do maximize their PBS to be respectful, responsible, and safe. So they help the students kind of utilize those things by giving them tactics on how to use it in the school, as well as progressive things as they get older to maximize that PBIS with online PBS bank system. And they even have apps for the older kids to be able to use their SOAR money at the SOAR store for lunch. They also have anti-bullying lesson that's taught in the 7th grade, and it's anywhere from 3 to 5 days, just so that they can have a foundation of bullying and hopes to decrease that throughout the school. And they're beginning conversations on restorative practices. I was able to speak with Elvin Carr at Lakota. He was the principal there for some years, and now is the ombudsman and lead of diversity and inclusion there, equity inclusion there. He was very helpful in trying to process what Lakota does. They have a specific form that is followed by the ombudsman and the superintendent when there's bullying that is reported. And then if somebody does have concerns, it remains in the student's electronic record. But they also post it publicly, which we saw on the previous slide. They have PD days that they utilize for support and training as needed. And then they have a policy of see something, say something. They also utilize Hope Squad for high school, and they have something similar in the junior high called Sources of Strength. Mr. Carr's main takeaway that he wanted to share with us is that transparency for students and families is super important to just promote open communication both ways and trust. So that was super helpful. They don't have a widespread restorative practice program, but they do have staff that are trained. So if they need to utilize it, they have the resources. And so with Claremont, and they track bullying through public school works and communicated with teachers, students, and parents. They utilize PD days to cover training. And then they also use their PD days to identify if there's any concerning students so that everybody can be on the same page and on the lookout for things. So if there's someone who seems like they're being bullied or somebody who is bullying. They utilize bullying surveys, which is connected to the obvious bullying prevention program that they utilize. And that we'll talk about a little bit later as well. They also have a mindful moment each day as a way to create that positive culture. They utilize PBIS with rewards and postcards, and they have a restorative practices program.
Just more about the mindful moment, what that is, how it happens, what levels of the schools.
I'm not sure who's what was doing, but they're not.
But don't give me the line on that. I do not remember, but I can send you more information from the actual document. that is-
Okay.
It might be what we used to do here too, not to interject, but, the group who does it, and if they play music in the mornings, and it's a time to like really reflect and have like a meditative moment with music playing, so I was curious, I know we used to do it for our primary.
Yeah.
So I was just curious if they did that for older kids or not too, you know.
Thank you very much for sharing what you know and sharing what you don't know, and just saying, we'll get back, so not a problem at all.
Transparency.
They use, well, I think I'm done with that. They don't have a restorative practice program. And then we actually spoke with Reading, and they have a board-approved form for initial allegations, and they track through Ohio work. At the elementary level, they use a process responsive classroom, and they utilize PBIS in the older grade levels. And then at the beginning of the year, they share a video with their students to kind of talk about bullying as a foundation. They ensure staff buy-in, training, and educational sessions, and they also have mediation and counseling for students. And then they utilize PBIS for restorative practices. And then finally, Sycamore, they have their tracking is completed in an internally created Google Doc. And if it meets criteria for bullying and intimidation, then it's tracked in a different database. They use district-wide training, including teachers, administration, and for their PD days, and they utilize PBIS. They have an interest and special interest club, like the similar to Hope Squad, but it's called Speak Up. And they have a fast track program to help empower students. And they utilize lunch, home, and flex for student training. And they have a safety committee, which is throughout the districts, not just one building, but has 8 counselors for administrative support. And they help address issues as they come up regarding bullying. And then they have a restorative practice in the code, but it's mostly subjective. The goal is to keep students in the classroom or at school instead of sending them away for suspension. So the common things are that all the reports are tracked. Some schools do it publicly, some do not, and then they utilize PD days for training, and then they maximize PDS to impact the culture. A lot of them have school programs, but it is consistent that most of them do not have restorative practices, like specific spelled out restorative practices policies. And I think that was one of the hopes for this group to find, but it sounds like each district has a subjective, this is a hardcore objective. It's like school start times last year. Everybody kind of has to deal with what's happening in their district. And so I think finding restorative practices as a common theme or as a best practice is a little challenging. And so we were not able to see actually any schools that had a formal restorative practice process. Wyoming's doing pretty good, so we're going to review what Wyoming does. They have a method of reporting in the student record. Again, it goes in the general file if it doesn't meet criteria for bullying, and it goes in the student record if it is formal. There's classroom curriculum in regards to anti-bullying activities. A lot of this is kind of just speaking to some of the school staff to make sure that it does exist, but it's not as specific. Meaning a lot of times when we talk with students, they're not sure about all the specific curriculums around them. Anti-bullying, positive behavior systems, we have them in all grades. Some schools are more proactive with the meetings and the maximizing that than others. And we have school programs in each grade, and then faculty-specific training. So we're doing pretty good. This just breaks down our PBIS. Again, I think the primary does really well with making sure the students know that I'm respectful, I'm responsible, I'm safe. They utilize Karen Calfolk and the stickers. I remember getting from kids bringing home. So very involved. I think in the middle school they have PBIS, but it doesn't meet as regularly, so it's not as I guess, transparent, not as obvious for us, for the students and the staff. They do have Lions Den curriculum around bullying, that, let's use. And then high school has, again, building expectations as well. But they also have Hope Squad as an option to support the students. So we'll talk about Hope Squad, just because we have it here, and I think it's good for us to know. I know it's new, some of our leaders came from Lakota, and I know that, they brought some of those wonderful ideas this way. So Hope Squad is a suicide prevention initiative, for high school students. It's adults are trained in a way that they can teach, high school students to be leaders on, school grounds for their peers. It's a core group of students that are chosen by their peers, and then peers are supposed to kind of come to them with any concerns regarding mood or safety or things like that. And as long as the students are comfortable talking to the people on the Hope Squad team, then that could be an effective method of support. There are options for middle school, which we talked about with Fairfield and Lakota utilizing it, and Fairfield, Lakota, Reading, and Wyoming all use Hope Squad. And Hope Squad is not just suicide prevention; it has other areas of focus, including safety, connectedness, bullying prevention, mental wellness, reducing stigma, and then substance abuse prevention. It is, however, unclear if the programs can be tailored to the elementary age students. The other program that is at Laremont is the obvious bullying prevention program. This is a very comprehensive program that's designed for elementary, middle, and junior high school students. It can be modified for high school students, and all students are involved in the work. Specific support for those identified as bullies, and then specific support for those identified as targets. It's all inclusive from the land from recognition, warning signs, impact, bullying, sexual orientation, and inside bullying. This is like I said, a very comprehensive program, and it's great because it also includes like parents in the community. And a lot of times if there is bullying related behaviors, a lot of that stuff happens outside of school. And so putting all that together and utilizing the community and the home life can be very effective if we, that's something that Wyoming chooses to do. So after just kind of reviewing all the things that we learned from definitions to what other schools are doing and the reporting process, the areas of potential improvement for Wyoming would be voice of the student. So a lot of the programs that we have don't come from the student. A lot of them are teacher-based or led by administration, and having the students kind of be on the forefront of what needs to happen is super helpful. And we think about bullying prevention training for staff. I don't know if we have it, but it doesn't sound like it's as specific as it could be. And then student surveys, which is interesting because I think student surveys are super important. I feel like that was my train that we need surveys, but all the surveys are connected to like programs. So very rare that there's a survey that seems like it could be helpful without having it connected to an obvious bullying program or another bullying program. And you have to buy into that whole program to maximize the surveys. So our recommendations are to introduce and implement an anti-bullying committee at each building. That includes a core group of students and at least one administrator and one staff member. This committee will review data trends, so not the specific, we don't want the students to look at the specific thing that happened, but the trends, and that will hopefully drive topics for professional development sessions and for staff and assemblies, for staff and assemblies for the students. So the hope is that the voice of the student can be the catalyst for the change that will support staff in handling situations with confidence. Each building should have hold at least 2 professional development sessions per semester, and then 2 assemblies per semester that cover bullying related topics for education for staff and students. And this allows for purposeful actions based off the reporting of the data trends and the anti-bullying committee recommendations in order to meet the needs directly related to the students of each school. So we don't want to talk to the high schoolers about pushing if that's the bigger issue that's happening in the elementary school, or have sexual harassment discussions with the middle schoolers if that's not the major concern there. So having an understanding of what the bullying reports are, the harassment reports are per building can help guide the PD sessions as well as the assemblies for the students. This slide is a summary of all of the recommendations altogether. The first one is just, again, publishing all the reports, not just the ones that are verified. so that they get a big picture of what's happening. And, we may consider expanding the definition of bullying in order to cover all acts, but it really is a subjective definition. I honestly believe that versus all the specific objective pieces. But as long as the student who feels that they're being treated incorrectly is included in that definition, and that's case scenario. Recommendation 2 is approve awareness of the safety SIP hotlines, give information both at the start of the school year, but also the start of the second semester. And then recommendation 3 is just acknowledging the voice of the student by including them in the discussion from the stage of reporting to the incident, through the intervention change. And then finally, recommendation 4, she's having recommending 2 PD sessions per semester and 2 student assemblies per semester. That's it. All right, any questions for our team?
I'm not asking a question. So I wanted to read the direct quote. First, Tim, we got this from Aaron Pfeffenberger. He told me to tell you hello.
Nice.
And the mindful moment is a daily moment through the announcements to stop and reflect each day among the student population.
Is that high school, elementary, or middle, or all, or?
Okay.
I'll ask you.
I tell him I said hi.
Yeah, do that.
I thought this was a great report. So this is fantastic and well done too. Awesome. Great CAC member. Great recruit. But and looking at the first recommendation, is that actually both formal and informal?
Yeah, so all, not just the formal, not just the formal verified. So right now, we only do the formal verified. We don't report informal, we don't report formal, we only report formal. So I just think even, and I know it's tough to talk about the informal ones, but I just think having an understanding of what's happening, like even the things that my children have experienced here, I feel like nobody knows but us. And it would be nice if there was some venue of like, what's happening in the school so that there's a bigger understanding from the administration leadership of the incidents, not just the ones that we follow.
And to make it holistic, so it's not just students, but it's students to teachers, teacher to students, all types of different types of bullying. I think we focus in on the students sometimes and miss out on other things that create a culture of bullying. It makes it feel like to the students that that's acceptable.
And I think one of the definitions actually did do very well with including the adults.
Yeah, it is.
Did you have discussions about, because as the president, I'm the one who gets the report, and pretty much every year there's one, that's it. Did you have some more in-depth discussions about what kind of bullying you think we're seeing here? 'Cause we know it's here.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying it's one. I have to say, reviewing this as many times as we reviewed it, I've always wondered previous years. I was like, well, 2021 was pandemic. Well, maybe that's why it was one. But it's interesting that you say this.
No, I haven't been the president that long, but it's never been more than one.
That's interesting. So I think we're just missing. I mean, if we talk to students, I feel like they hear a lot. If we go back to that definition of being excluded or even being like made to do things that you didn't want to do, or just I think students have a lot of experiences, a lot of instances that are doing this, and that's unfortunate if you don't get to see that and the team doesn't get to see that and talk about it. Because why are we here? So we're here for some reason, and I refuse to believe it's because of one incident per year.
Right. No.
We being this group of
Right.
CAC.
No, I think this particular
And the topic that we wanted to
this
know
topic
about.
would be here if it was really just one year.
Correct.
And so we are missing out on something. And so I don't think it's just the definition, I think it's the reporting. I think those reportings are happening, so the informal and the formal, they're being done. Just with the transparency, this is there. Like even a few instances that I've had with my kids out here, this is what happened. And then my kid, one of them told me the end result. She wrote me a letter and that was supposed to be the end. I didn't hear that part. And the other kid, I still don't know what happened. So in regards to the transparency piece, we miss a lot. And so you don't even know what president with my two because you don't.
Right.
And I can speak to that. I personally, as a counselor, track why students come to see me. And a lot of times mean behavior, it kind of looks different in every grade. So I think that's part of why our recommendations are to be more specific, so we can have tailored conversations with each grade. You know, fifth grade may be a lot of just exclusion on the playground, eighth grade cyberbullying, seventh grade conflict resolution with friend groups. I think it's a little bit different at each grade, but having that information would help us really tailor what we address with each grade level.
I'm wondering too if the districts that had an identified form, a board approved form, a structured form, I'm wondering if they felt like that helped to drive the conversations as with their committees or with their teams will really do better with information around bullying. If the form was just a big tool in and of itself.
This is a question we never asked for forms. We don't even know what and I've never seen it, but I don't know what the form looks like or what.
I worked for a district that tracked it really specific, and they were able to run a report at the end of every semester, and it said like buses were an issue with fifth graders, or you know, cafeteria was an issue with seventh graders, or things like that, and it did really help with that.
Because I'm thinking of the conversations that I think it was Sycamore that had the committee. And I think that would probably really help drive some of these conversations.
And that was gonna be my question, is that why you suggested a committee here? Do you think that will be a sounding block for potential bullying situations that don't end up as written reports?
That's what we think.
We see something at lunch, we wanna talk about it in this committee.
Right, and then we put together, with the student being kind of the loud voice, determine how to best get that word out or communicate it to the school or their peers to improve that behavior, decrease those.
Which is also great, because I think we've all talked about this, we always want each child to have somebody they trust at the schools to go to, and even as much as like they love the parks, sometimes I know the kids are like, I'm not talking to anybody. I mean, that's like what I hear, so sometimes you're like, But then also as a community, the role of the parent or the friend who does hear it, who the child's asking them, don't say anything, just that whole culture, I think, is tricky, but good to define, or try to figure out what we want. And I think, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, when we originally even were like the definition of bullying, where we found it gets tricky is sometimes the kids are the same, like, they're bullying me, and you're like, actually, Ron was just asking me what to do. Like, sometimes it's not bullying, and sometimes it is, so really being able to have somebody to have that conversation to weed out.
Thank you for
We're all
calling out.
looking at the bullying.
But thank you for calling out how much Rhonda,
Bullying.
You wouldn't think that by looking at Rhonda.
Rhonda's just asking for finances, right? Anyway.
It's not really runs. It's on a middle
Rhonda's
school
wonderful.
level. I'm only a little bit familiar with the HOPE program, and only on a high school level, and more for suicide prevention. And on the middle school level, how does that translate?
So this is a question, I think.
More sensitive to younger
It's interesting because they literally is the students who are the go-to, and I think what we talked about in our group is, and we are high schoolers, and it's this, the core group of people who are the go-tos are people that are not comfortable talking to,
Right.
missing all kinds of things. And I think so the same thing probably true for the middle schoolers as well, but I don't know.
There's a lot of pressure on that group that becomes the HOPE squad. They carry a lot, and I don't, how does that translate to a middle school kid who's
You're saying would middle schoolers be capable in that same way?
well, and yeah, their sensitivity is,
Maturity.
they're kind of,
And it could be the organization
on their own
design
level.
for high school. Sometimes the audience is high school,
Right.
something different from middle school.
Right.
So I've been through the training for Hope Squad. I went to Utah, and we did the training in a previous district. So it does go down to middle school, and the thoughts behind Hope Squad is that your student population is choosing the students in which they believe best represent students that they would want to speak to. It's not the most popular students. It's not,
right.
the student council. And so then those students and their parents go through training, and those students go through set curriculum that was developed through Hope Squad to best support those students in their journey in helping to support students of, that may come to them. They are not there to be trained counselors. They are there to receive information, and they know that they're passing that information on to an adult. They don't keep information. That's part of the mantra of Hope Squad, is that that student collects that information and does not keep it. If a student is talking about harm to self or harm to others, that they pass that along to a counselor or another trusted adult. But that is part of their curriculum. They have a very set curriculum. It's now a 3-year curriculum for both middle school and high school. And students can continue through that curriculum, or they can opt in and out at a year kind of service, if you will.
A couple things I wanted to mention. Heather and I get the opportunity in CAC this year to partner and support in different ways. So we've heard the presentation and seen it. I've been trying to make sure that the additional questions that have come to my mind since the last time we talked don't dominate the discussion, because the rest of our board is new to this and has better questions anyway. I did want to make sure Kara, who's not in the room, gets a chance to share any questions she's got. Sometimes when you're the one person not in the room with all the other people, the thoughts you've got are hard to break in. So please make sure, that's not the case for you. One question, not a question, but when we talk about Hope Squad, and are these the people who they will talk to? Or you talk about middle school, I'm not going to talk to the counselor. That's one of those cultural things. Like there's a reality that's either a lot or a little in a place that says, I'm going to share this thing that I've seen, or I'm not. And so for me, the thing I was excited about in the discussion is us understanding like what's true in Wyoming today. We talk about the Wyoming way, we talk about lots of different things. It's not just that somebody's in your face pointing their finger in your chest, whatever, but there's a sense sometimes in the community that I'm not going to say something about this to my coach because this person is doing that, and this person is either connected in some way or there's going to be some consequence that comes to me if I do that thing. And so that could be with saying something to the counselor. It could be. So one of the questions for me is how in our culture do we get to the see something, say something? How do we get to the place where someone will say, I'm absolutely going to share? It may not be that this is actually bullying, but it's okay for me to say that. It's okay for me to talk it and share it. I don't have to carry it, especially carrying things that make me less likely to be, kind of present in classrooms or in other places. What's the thought you have based on what you've seen in places or what you've lived in our culture that would help us get more to that? I don't know exactly where we are, if we're 50% of the way to that or what have you, but what would be some things you've seen or that you think about that would help us be more like that, where the default is, I am going to say something. It may be demonstrated to be true or not, or verified or not, but I'm going to say something instead of be fearful of saying something.
Well, I think a lot of that starts at home. So you made me think about my daughter who came to me about a concern she had at school. She said, but I think some of that is rooted at home, which forced this in further, so. And then besides that, the hope is that if we do have like an anti-bullying committee, that the kids feel comfortable talking to that group. But that's all I have recommendations wise is that, we kind of try to be as transparent as we can and let everyone know that, we're doing this work towards it. And my kids got to watch me make this, and I got to pick their brains about mine and about, all the things that come up. And that's those conversations with this assemblies or whatever are super important. We talk about it. Programs we have with that, or assemblies they have to have
Assemblies are key. The committee that works at Sycamore, they are very active around sharing information, and it's not always negative. It's not that the assembly is entitled anti-bullying. It might be entitled something positive, but it does encourage those that might even be afraid. See something, say something, I don't know what it is, but continually saying that and embracing that and seeing that poster on the wall or in the cafeteria every now and then seeing it change, be it a color or something, just continually reminding everybody that we have a culture that we're proud of, and speaking up and continually improving are the two things that we want everyone to do to ensure that we have a culture that we're all proud of.
I think Wyoming has a lot of good things. I think that, even if it's full of training, but I think some of the things we just, we're in the middle of the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic, that we're not able to actually put all the energy towards like some of the programs that are already in place. Even the PBIS stuff is like we have it, and then some of the schools are not. So I just think being able to use what we have and then maybe add it.
And go ahead. I was gonna say, just kind of hanging on your point, in the place, there's kind of two things that I talked about. There's a whole notion around, see something, say something, but there's a whole anti-retaliation culture that gets built first. And I think that's not something that gets talked about a lot in the school platform. That's what enables people to see something and say something and say, I think I may have seen something that might be bullying. I don't know. It's not for the kid to be the judge during execution of what they see as bullying. But if you create the environment where we want you to say something if you think you might see something, build an anti-retaliation culture. And retaliation is a form of bullying. It's not listed anywhere. I think that is what creates that see something, say something culture, because everything we're describing is retaliation, whether it's from a student, teacher, coach, whoever it might be, and eliminating that and creating that safe space, and also removing the burden from the student to say and know exactly when I see bullying, it's there. Creating those two structures creates see something, say something culture. I think that's something that we can continue to work on.
I was just going to add, I think what you give time to sends a great message, right? So the assemblies, I'm really intrigued by having assemblies and opening up the data piece and allowing kids to talk with staff about the problems that they're having, and if it comes down to utilizing a form to help get better data, and we can find out where issues are happening, and let kids talk about the issues that they see happening, and brainstorm strategies to help, to determine some going actions. It sounds interesting, and I feel like that just giving time to it might help create the culture you're talking about.
Are there conversations in the high school about how they use that? Flex, thank you. All I could think of was advisor, and I knew that wasn't correct. Might that be a place where conversations could take place?
Absolutely good. Yeah, and they're talking about, as we finish the year, they'll be doing a lot more reflecting on how flexes work, what student feedback have they gotten about the use of that time. I don't know to what level those conversations have been yet.
The last thing I had on this, and I want to make sure I hear what Kara's thinking. Part of it comes to, and how do you ask the question, and sort of what do you start as your base of understanding. So when you say that roughly 20% of people are experiencing something that's in this space, that having some intimidating effect or some effect on them being less of themselves, less likely to be open for the learning and everything. I think you could say, do we have any issues with bullying? Do we have any things going on? So you ask that question in a room of people, kids, whatever. Nobody's going to raise their hand and say, yes, this is happening because blah, blah, blah. And I'm not saying that's what we're doing. But if you ask the question just differently, which is, we know that 1 out of every 5 students in this room is experiencing something on some level at some point in the year that has a diminishing effect on you, and you give them an opportunity to frame what are some of the either reasons where they might be afraid to share, talk, say, kind of whatever. So I'm envisioning literally a 5 or 6 question survey that's anonymous or whatever, and asking some of those kind of things, and then saying, we know that there's some things happening on a regular basis that are having an effect that's more limiting of you than bringing you fully present. What are some of those things you're seeing? Those kinds of ways of framing the question, I think, and giving the access for them to share their perspective on it in a way where there's not going to be the possibility of a retribution or something like that. I think it could be something that helps us see like what the data kind of looks like, even beyond the reported informals or the non-reported formals, because by the time somebody gets to that point, it's already overcome 3 levels of fear or apprehension to even get to the point of that, if there's a place where they have any thought that there's a retaliation culture. So one of the questions I had is, how do we keep using those kinds of approaches to get perspective on things and to frame for people? We realize it, it's present, and we're going to make progress to have it be different.
I love that. I was on the board of surveys, like, let's do a survey, let's figure out what people are doing. So I hear you out there, I can still find a validated one that looks like you.
Yeah.
To most people in the world.
Right.
Sure.
Karen, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the CAC for doing such a great presentation. It was interesting to see what we've said in policy, and kind of just thinking about one formal report when we know that's not the case it does make me think, and you all have suggested this very nicely, it's got to be a multi-pronged approach. And I think we've, in recent years, started to put such an emphasis on adult-student relationships, and that the more that we do to create conversation, just natural conversation around what students are experiencing, even if they don't necessarily label it bullying or whatever is happening, the more teachers know students, the more we allow space for conversations in different ways, through assemblies, through teachers having, and I'm sure it's a dreaded word to hear committee, but to have this kind of brought to the forefront just in a regular way, I think can kind of get to the heart of the culture. And I think we're on the way, but we're a small community, and I can see where, you know, right out of the gate, experiences that I've had with my own children, out of the gate, you don't necessarily want to say anything because it might make it worse. And I think anytime I've heard my kids or other kids talk about assemblies they've had, like in 6th grade, or little programs where they get a chance to just talk, maybe not about a reporting type of thing, but just sharing things that have happened, have been very powerful. Even if maybe they realize they could have been a part of something that hurt someone. And so I really do think it's hard to work in the time, and maybe not every assembly is a big assembly, but I like all the ideas of making it part of a regular topic, I guess. So anyway, no real question, but thanks so much.
Thank you.
And I know we're keeping it. I just want to say to what Ilya said, we got to hear it once, and thank you for even, I think what was great out of it, what we were saying is we had such a robust conversation about it. And even when we got to restorative practices, or the fact that it's hard to define, or that people aren't doing as much, I think as a group for CAC, we got to delve into it a little deeper. And it's, I don't know, I guess even good to see that you're asking so many different places and there's not something cut and dry.
That one actually surprises me,
Doesn't it?
So after there really, no one is doing anything.
But Tracy was helping say to the definition, like what I think of restorative practices is different than maybe what the true definition, right? Just that alone is bigger and different than another topic I think on its own.
I spoke to Adam Felcher, who's the restorative practices kind of expert through Best Point, who's our mental health provider, and he said it is very difficult school-wide, very a big burden, costly, and every single person has to be trained, and every single person in the school building has to implement it with fidelity. So to do it school-wide, it's very difficult, but a lot of counselors, administrators are trained, and that's how schools do it, is with those specific people.
Yeah, I read a lot of articles, journal articles, when we first started this, just to get a baseline understanding of it. Probably went too high. But I heard the exact same thing. There's entire books written on restorative practices, and some of the people that are the stars of it in the field, they come back and say there's like 10% of people who say that they're doing restorative practices that are actually doing restorative practices. I talked to the South Bend School District up in Indiana because I have family up there. And as soon as I said it, my wife mentioned it to her. She said, "Oh, I do that." So I said, "Oh, let me talk to you." And it ended up being all about punitive and how the justice system of the school was administered. Very little about a culture. So not a lot of people are doing it right.
Yeah.
For some reason.
But it was interesting to figure that out, even from you all doing it, what we thought might exist or be more accessible.
There are some things when we define bullying, figure out restorative practices.
Oh, you did so much more. You guys.
Great job.
Jack.
That is going on the right way. Thank you. I appreciate the time and the energy you put to this, and keep us informed as you're now our community authorities in the field.
I was gonna say, I think you set a high standard, for the communication of the information, the framing of the clarity. When I saw the summary of all the recommendations, they were listed all the way through. It was like you told us what you're gonna tell us, and you told us, and then you tell them what you told them and all that. So thank you for doing that very well. But also, I think I want to acknowledge the group and the community, because the conversation around to talk about bullying and to talk about, is there a thing? Do we have a challenge? Do we have an issue? It's been discussed in our community. We've talked about this before, but the answer was given before we started the inquiry. because we wanted to make sure that it didn't come out that there was something present we should be doing more about in this area, because it wouldn't be consistent with us thinking well of ourselves and seeing ourselves as being such a great and wonderful district. I don't think those are mutually exclusive, and I think the conversation that we're in and the set of inquiries that it will continue to foster and create is valuable for us, so that we see what's present and we identify how do we keep having some of those things removed that could get in the way of any one of these students in our district, kind of getting the education we're paying for, we're trying to facilitate. So thank you for that, including Tim, the whole leadership, for being comfortable that we would go into this conversation, because it's something that can be uncomfortable and something we don't want to see the answers to. And we're in a different place today than we were years ago. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We might get a discount on that. Taxes.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
That's a great question.
But you might as well ask, right?
And I said that so Robbie wouldn't have to, and you didn't think she was good.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you very
yeah,
much.
you can
Thank
go.
you very much.
Yeah, we have a second presentation on literacy and at the new literacy bill and how we're dealing with it in the school system. Kara, do you want to look at the screen? Do you have the presentation?
I have both presentations.
Okay, all right, good. Then I'm gonna give you Tracy here.
But it was, there were some reasons.
She's got the presentation, she says. All right.
Thank you, Susie.
No problem.
Sorry, I'm getting other way here. It's like I'm ready
We're
when
having,
you are.
we're just excited about that last.
Like, I'm here all day.
So, Tracy,
I'm just used to
Tracy,
you
thank you.
saying something first.
Yes,
so-
yes. Appreciate you sharing the impact of this literacy bill and the proactive work that's happening. You'll hear about the requirements that districts have, but also the steps that, some of which even come as actions in this board meeting. And so Tracy will give an overview of what this is all about and what we're doing, and then certainly answer whatever questions you have. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to kind of go backwards to move forward. So I wanted to start a few years back and let you know kind of what we've done, even before we knew about the literacy bill coming aboard and the dyslexia law that we've all heard about. So when we think about, and often you hear me and I talk a lot about MTSS, and I stand here and I give you that lovely picture, which you're going to see in a couple slides, so don't you worry.
Oh, but the
Here
umbrella,
again.
the umbrella's coming.
It's coming. The umbrella will be here every time you see me.
We're ready.
But I wanted to start with kind of looking back, and we started with a backward design when we thought about how are we helping students learn to read if they're not proficient readers. And so taking a step back a couple years ago, we made sure that all of our intervention specialists, K through 12, were trained in Orton-Gillingham. And that is a multi-sensory literacy and approach. So we made sure that was happening, and as new ISs are hired, we make sure that they go through an OG training. And that is typically a 4 to 6 day training. And so everyone on board right now has that training under their belt. We also, and this is true and has been true, that all of our ISs are trained to implement the reading goals that are written on IEPs, and they're focused on that specially designed instruction. So we make sure that as we're writing those goals, they're aligned to what we know that good reading supports are needed for students. In looking at both the Orton-Gillingham and that specially designed instruction, we knew a couple years ago that we needed some of our intervention specialists, not everybody, but some of our intervention specialists needed to have kind of a next tier or a next level of intensity. And so several of our ISs are trained in very intensive, specialized, evidence-based reading programs that are also approved or accredited for students with severe dyslexia. So we did that again before we even knew about this literacy bill. So at each grade band, we have specialists that are even more than just those that can implement reading goals. They have that extra level of expertise for students who are still not closing that gap. We have some reading strategies classes. And then that last kind of section there, when we started looking at our continuum of service, we realized that we maybe weren't as diligent and as very explicit and specific as we needed to be. So we made sure that we have reading strategies classes and co-taught ELA classes beginning in 5th grade all the way through 12th grade. And that is part of our standard service delivery for all students who are identified as having reading difficulty. If they need either of those supports, they're able to get those. In addition, a couple years ago, we purchased Learning Ally, which is what we would call an accommodation for students. It's an audiobook accommodation, and it has human readers versus voice audio computer-based readers. And we have that for any student who has a reading difficulty. And then we also purchased Newsella or Newsela, and that is around informational text. And every student in the district, irregardless of their reading capabilities, has access to that. So those are two really important accommodations that students can have when they're in the regular classroom because of some reading difficulty. So we looked at that from that backward map, meaning kids that were having difficulties, how can we best support them? In addition to that, we began this year looking at the foot forward. And so I just wanted to take a couple minutes to talk to you about things we were doing foot forward, again, outside of the literacy bill that was coming about. So our primary school's ELA committee was really working this year to understand and apply the science of reading. We'll talk a little bit about what that means. They were embarking on a book study, and you may have heard Gina talk a little bit about this. Sorry, I have to move my sticky notes. But they've talked a lot about something called shifting the balance, where we've taken some of our traditional notions of teaching students to read and shifted them over to this idea of the science of reading and why evidence-based reading approaches are really important. And we'll talk about our next year's work, but many of the ELA committee, all of the ELA committee has really embarked on this journey. It's a K2 resource, but we have other folks reading it as well. So that's one area that we looked at trying to be put forward. We also looked at our primary school using universal assessments in tiers of intervention that were different than we knew in the past, because they were targeting very specific reading skills or reading splinters. These are often indicators of dyslexic tendencies that we know prevent kids from attaining that good reading. Again, now we know we're aligned to what the bill says, but in advance of that, we just knew it was good practice to begin looking at this and shoring up our core. Right now, in the spring, we're piloting a Tier 1 curriculum at our primary schools that targets explicit and systematic reading, and it really ties into phonemic awareness and phonics and orthology and those kind of pieces, so that when kids don't know how to attack a word, they're helping, this program is helping them in their regular class, so they don't have to go somewhere else. We understand that the best place to get that is in your regular class. So we're doing some piloting of that, so we know what's best for next year. And then again, foot forward, ODE has put together a series called All Students Can Read. And it's a pretty intensive series. So what I asked is that there was a designee from each one of the grade bands that was able to take some time every 6 weeks or so out of their classroom to attend it. It's virtual, so it's not like they have to go to Columbus, but it's pretty intensive. So we did that as part of trying to understand this new way of thinking about teaching reading. So those are things that we were kind of doing backward and then foot forward to get our ideas together as a Wyoming district. And then the umbrella. So as we thought about both of those pieces, and you'll see that little RTI right there, our tiers of intervention, we really hit that Tier 1 piece. How are we shoring up? Because what we know is our K1-2 kiddos, they're the kiddos that are learning to read first, right? So we want that tier 1 to be the best tier 1 it can be. I brought this back because I wanted you to notice that not only are we looking at our interventions and our core, but right next to that, on the other side of the umbrella stick, is professional development. We're going to talk about what that looks like and how we're helping to support that. But right below professional development, we're talking about curriculum design. And so in our MTSS system, when we're talking about really being intentional and teaching our students to read, we're using lots of components from MTSS to make this happen. And I wanted to just demonstrate that in a way that wasn't just about trying to fix the student, but being proactive about trying to plan for great instruction for all. So thinking about this literacy bill and the impact, I know that Tim provided for you a connection or a link to the law, those about 4 pages. That's also linked here if you ever wanted to go back and find it. But I like the Cliff Note version. So what you have here on this slide is kind of the Cliff Note version. So what this literacy bill does is it defines dyslexia for us, and it addresses how we should approach screening students, teaching teachers, and training staff, right? So what it does for us is it tells us we have to redefine how we teach reading. We have to identify our struggling readers, and specifically, it tells us that we have to screen every child K-3, and we have to screen any child that a parent is referring or they transfer into us from another district, grades 4 through 12. It requires us to have a multidisciplinary team approach to that, and we have to notify parents of any results. And it requires professional development for our teachers, along with a district certification for our specialists. And that includes our K-3 teachers and our special education friends. So that's what it does. What I wanted to share with you are some of the things that we already have in place that we did because it's just great teaching and it's best practice. So when we think about how we're changing, how we're teaching students to learn to read, we're tackling that with that foot forward and that kind of look down. But we're also looking at identifying struggling readers. We do have universal screeners, and we've talked about that a few times with our math data. And if you're coming to student achievement, we're talking about that with our follow-up progress monitoring and how we're using Ames Web and those pieces. So we have that in place. Our buildings are using multidisciplinary teams to talk about students. And those are our MTSS benchmark teams where we're coming together and having good conversation about the academic struggles of students. So that's not something new that we're doing. It's something that we're just aligning ourselves to what they're asking in this bill. We do notify parents when students are struggling through our tiered forms. We will continue to do that and align our practices within this bill. And then our professional development we've done, we're waiting for some guidance from the state specifically about what they would like the professional development for the literacy bill to be, but we feel like we're really aligned to that, and you'll see some action on the board agenda around some first step training for many of our teachers, which is really exciting. So we feel like we're in pretty good shape when we look at these 4 key components to the bill. So one of the things I did want to share with you is how the state is defining dyslexia. So I'll just let you read that. Partly because I have to run and get a drink of water. So a couple of things I wanted to point out is really unexpected difficulties with fluent word recognition, poor spelling, decoding, because it's inconsistent with the person's intelligence, their motivation, and their capabilities. That's really key. We don't know why a student has these dyslexic tendencies because we can't explain it, but they're not fluent. They can't attack words the way in which we think they can. But I also want to point out, because it's very clear in this literacy bill, that because a student may have dyslexic tendencies based on the screening of this bill, it does not mean they are a student under IDEA, which is special education, as a student identified with dyslexia. So I think it's really important for us to understand and really utilize our MTSS process. A student may have dyslexic tendencies. They may just not get it, right? They may just need some extra practice in some area. And that's why we're going to screen them and we're going to provide that extra practice. And it may just shore things up and then we're good to go. But just because they need that extra practice does not mean that they need to be identified as a student with a disability. It just means they need a little bit of extra time. And so I think that's important for parents to know. This is not a sentence to have an IEP. It's not something to become very worried about. It's something that we're all looking at that screening and we're going to partner with parents so that we have a process in place to help shore those concerns up. So I just wanted to put that in place for you all and be able to talk to that tonight. So when we think about the dyslexia law or the literacy bill, one of the things I wanted to step back from, and there are links here. So you received the dyslexia law requirements from Tim, that's right there. Also, if you go to the ODE website, which is the dyslexia support, they have a lot of information there. On the other side of that, Ohio's done a great job to pull together some evidence-based resources and a step-by-step kind of goal and protocol for themselves around raising literacy achievement for all Ohio students. And that's really what I'm going to reference the rest of our conversation tonight, because that's really where we should be spending our time. Right now, there is a draft dyslexia guidebook. However, it's remained in draft because it is not yet approved by ODE. But really, all the good work that we need to look at is in that literacy achievement book. So I went ahead and just clipped a few pictures from that, a few charts from that. So when we think about students and how they come into reading and what areas of difficulty they might have, we start out with something called the simple view of reading. And we know reading is really complex, but we can kind of break it down into two areas of concern. One area of concern might be word reading, where they have concern around phonological difficulties or that word attack piece, right? Another area of concern could be language comprehension. And if you kind of look up here, you will see that there's a space where if you're a strong word reader and a strong language comprehender, you're a typical reader, right? And then if not, if you have a weak area in word reading, you're probably going to be a phonological student, a student with some phonological differences. That's where we sometimes get that kind of catchphrase of, oh, you have dyslexic tendencies, right? And then in the other area, you might be someone with a comprehension difficulty, that language difficulty if you have weak comprehension, okay? And then sometimes you have a kiddo that has both areas. But this is what we're calling the simple view of reading. This is really where we're kind of breaking down our areas of what are we kind of trying to help support in that student's learning, right? And what are we testing for, or what are we looking for in our screening? So just like I said, those are kind of the pieces here that we want to know. If I have good decoding and good language comprehension, I'm going to have good reading comprehension. If one is lacking and I'm using this math problem, then the other is not going to be, it's not going to have enough weight to make me a strong reader. So what we know is I have to have explicit and systematic instruction in one or both of my weak areas in order to make a change. So that's what the simple view of reading is telling us. But I wanted to bring here tonight, and I'm not going through all of this, but we do have a Dyslexia Committee that meets tomorrow, a kind of a reading committee that is going to meet tomorrow. It's a K-12 committee that will begin to do some work around this bill. And we're going to dig in even deeper to this because I think it's really important that our K-1-2 teachers know how to teach students how to read, right? But when you get to, and we've had this conversation, when you get to 6th, 7th, 8th grade, I wasn't really teaching students how to read in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade when I was an English teacher. I thought my friends in K-1-2 were doing that. Sometimes I had difficulty because my kids weren't ready for the next step. But it's important that all teachers that are expecting kids to read know the systems that go behind it. So we take a lot of time and we're digging into this idea of the reading rope and what it means and why we do what we do. And so trying to have a conversation and really think through the strands that go into reading, or the weave, the web that we create, or the rope that is managed when we put all of these great pieces of language comprehension and word recognition together. And how do we know what we know? We've talked about this in student achievement. We know what we know because our math data is telling us that kids know how to pull it all together at the very end and they're successful. Prior to that, if they're stumbling through something, that's my progress monitoring data. That's that screening data that the state is saying, hey, I want you to go back and do some screening. We've got that. We're just waiting for them to say, yes, we like what you're doing, because there'll be an approved list of screeners that they'll give us. And if ours isn't on there, then we'll find one that's on there. But we know, and our teachers know, that that's coming because we're already looking for those skill sets. Okay? So I just wanted to bring that forward so that you could see why we do math and why we do some of that skill set testing. Just again, I'm sharing this tomorrow with our teachers because I wanted to bring back that idea that when we think about MTSS, it's bringing back that universal screener to figure out what we know and we don't know, and then putting an intervention in place to help support that student, and we build on that intervention. When I've come and talked to the board before about why MTSS, it's here's our great core instruction with our regular ed teachers, and then we add those interventions on top of that, kind of like extra dips of the sundae, in order to get more support for certain students, right? And that's really what they're saying here with our literacy bill. Give some more supports for students who need some more support. I'm going to show you 3 quick slides that really sum up the skills that we're teaching K2, intermediate, and then as adolescent readers. And the reason I want you to see this as a board is because as we start the process of learning to read, it really starts with our friends, our speech pathologists. I feel like you're plants in the audience.
I know.
I chose you.
I mean, the whole audience.
Which one is it? And what's really exciting, and sometimes I forget this, as a former reform gifted coordinator, I always come in and many of the students that I was seeing in kindergarten and first grade were solid readers, or so I thought were solid readers, because they would pick up a book and they'd read every word. What now I'm realizing is they didn't have all the blue. My really gifted kids that were coming into kindergarten reading were doing a lot of word calling, and they didn't have that sound association. They weren't able to tell me the exact phoneme sound of each minute segment of every word. And that's okay when you're in kindergarten and first and second grade and the words are like this big. It's definitely not okay when you get to 8th and 9th and 10th grade and the words are this big, because that's multiple syllables, and kids that don't know how to sound out this much can guess and pretty much get it right. They can't guess this big and get it right. So now we're seeing that discrepancy. When I think about this, and we talk about what we want to make sure kids have, think about oral language. Well, we want kids to be able to listen to stories and have that language-rich environment and talk about what they're hearing, along with all of these other pieces to word recognition. And so sometimes it feels like we go backwards to teach the skills to go forward. So when parents come up to you and say, how come that kindergarten teacher is telling my kid to stop reading? We're not telling them to stop reading. What we're saying is, hey, we want to make sure they have the appropriate sounds that go with each little minute aspect of every word, so that they're great readers now and can be even better readers when they're in high school and beyond. And that's why we take the time to do that. Because quite honestly, when you're in kindergarten and you step foot the first day of kindergarten, we only expect you to know 3 letters. That's what we expect. First day of kindergarten, 3 letters. Like almost every one of our kindergartners blow that benchmark out of the water, right? That doesn't mean we don't do this, because what we know is neurologically is that none of our brains know innately how to read. We have to be taught systematically and explicitly how to read. And so in doing so, we have to hit all of these things. So the reason I'm belaboring this is that we have to go back and we have to do all these components really well, K1, 2, and that's exactly what the primary is focused on with that foot forward. And they're really being diligent about doing that piece so that when we get to 3rd and 4th and 8th and 10th and whatever, we've got kids that have all of this solid. And so look at how it changes. This is kind of our intermediate. So think about this as like, let's say like 2nd through 7th grade-ish. We still have some of that word attack, like we're decoding, we want to be fluent, but look at background knowledge and vocabulary and verbal reasoning. Those are those higher level skills that we want students to have so that they can comprehend higher level text. Now think about an adolescent reader. And so we have less on that word recognition, but think advanced word study, where we're talking about Greek and Latin roots. We're talking about multi-syllable words for adolescent readers. And then look at all of that rich language comprehension structure. So when we think about how we're shifting our reading, it starts with that really concrete sound word association. And that's what the simple view of reading, the science of reading is telling us. Start with the sound and the letter correspondence, and then move to that language comprehension. And do it in a very systematic way so that you can end up with all your readers as adolescents here and feeling solid with these structures. So I brought that out because I wanted you to see kind of that sequence from place to place to place. And I think it's cool. So it is all from that one, the ODE book on literacy and their goals, which again, it has nothing. I think what's really cool about our conversation is everybody kept calling it the dyslexia bill, it's the dyslexia law. Really what it is making sure we're teaching all our kids really good literacy and really good reading strategies. And so it's less about dyslexia and more about that core instruction. So here, I'll just sum up with these couple of things. So here are the action steps that are happening now and ongoing in response to the literacy bill. So we have professional development, and you'll see that on the board agenda. We have a process in place for our K-3 teachers, inclusive of that Orton Gillingham training. We determined that status. Some of our teachers have had that, either in other districts, or we have trained some of our teachers here, so they don't have to be retrained. We will be designating master level specialists, which will give them some additional training so that they can almost be some coaching when we have students that are just not shoring up that gap. That will likely be our reading specialist and our intervention specialist. We'll be providing them some additional training. We also want to be very intentional and extend our training of our intervention specialists and our speech language pathologists, because we know hitting kids early and getting those gaps shored up is where we want to be. So those are the pieces that we're doing around PD. At the primary level, again, in response to this bill, we're auditing our current practices. We're mapping out the current interventions and making sure they align. We want to make sure we obtain those materials that we need, and we have a response to each one of those blue skills, like phonological awareness and phonics and language development. We need to make sure we have an intervention for each. As soon as ODE gives us the screening tools that we're allowed to use, I was told that it might be like the middle to late May. We will look at that and we'll adopt a tool. We already have our multidisciplinary team in place, and we're working on our parent notifications, which would be in a letter. include some of that reading development and that structured literacy, programming. So those are the pieces that we're doing in response to the bill. But I also wanted to share with you what we're doing is just because it's good stuff, right? And so, our professional development timeline and plan, we really feel like, why wouldn't we want to train at least our fourth grade teachers, because it's K-4 billing. But we happen to be at benchmark, and our fifth and sixth grade teachers ELA teachers were really excited about just hearing a little bit more about morphology and ways in which they could also support students who have not yet acquired all of those word attack skills. So our fifth and sixth grade teachers are also going to be Gillingham trained. So regular ed teachers will have that framework, which is exciting. And then we're looking at some 7-12 English and ELA teachers, and what might make sense. When you get to the 7th grade and above, having Orton training is nice, but there's some other things that we could do that would make more sense for those folks. So we're still investigating that a little bit. Like I said, Gina went ahead and offered this as a book study to the primary. What we know is Shifting the Balance 2 and the intermediate version is coming out, so we'd like to offer a book study for that. There is also a book called Know Better, Do Better that is appropriate for K-12 around the science of reading, so we're considering that as a book study so that it doesn't just kind of stop at the primary or intermediate level. So those are ideas for professional development, again, beyond just what the bill is requiring. And then we really are also taking some time while we're doing our curriculum mapping to look at the core instruction at our middle and high schools to make sure it's aligned with the science of reading. Making a commitment to develop those automatic interventions at our middle schools, for students who have those splinter skills that have not yet mastered those blue boxes. We want to audit our current interventions. We've already looked at aligning some of our reading specialist time at the middle school to fit more of an intervention model that would be helpful for students and evidence-based. And then we want to make sure we have appropriate materials at our middle and high school as well. So that's kind of where we are in a nutshell. Are there any questions?
I think this is super helpful. It's like super important. When a bill, in the bill itself, something we're already going above and beyond what the bill is kind of calling for. So do we like the bill? Is it, like in general, like, word on the street, like, hey, there's literally something like, we like it, or no. Or
I love the answer. So we personally think that it's not a bad idea. I think the two most impressive things about the bill are that it is not suggesting that because a child has a tendency to have some struggles and needs some additional practice, that they belong somewhere else. And that's, I think, is really powerful. I think it also, although unfunded, which is annoying, so that part I don't like. It's totally an unfunded mandate. But sorry, I think you guys are used to that. But another piece that I do think is powerful is that it's providing, or it's partnering professional development with evidence-based practices. And I do find that ODE is doing that more often. And so that is helpful. So I think those two pieces are helpful. It does require more screening. There is conversation about the screening needing to match the third grade reading guarantee screening, and that they don't want to duplicate or have two screenings for kindergartners, two screenings for first graders, you know what I mean? So I imagine if I were a betting woman that third grade reading guarantee and this, these would mirror. We already give our KRA to kindergarten. All right, so this bill is going to require a screener for kindergarten. So what might that look like? That would alleviate some of this. They're going to play that game just like our gifted testing can be used for third grade reading guarantee, which can be used for alternate. We need to have a chart out. I imagine a lot of this will fit into that. To a degree, because remember several years ago when we had to do the time that we took to test kids, that's really sensitive to folks. So, and part of the dyslexia screener is 3 times a year. Well, that's what we know is universal. 3 times a year is a great universal benchmark. So it has to be quick, short, and doable.
So it won't necessarily be our math assessment.
Math is not going to be a universal screener for dyslexia because it's broad reading. It's over here. Remember on the rope, it's over here. They're looking for something over here that's skill based.
Okay.
So if I were a betting lady, it could be something like a fluency screen. Math has a fluency screen. It could potentially be something like a portion of Ames Web, which is what we give, and it calls out splinter skills. It could potentially be something like we do a tower assessment, we do a PASS assessment. They call out for splinter skills and they're very quick. So those could be measures that could potentially be on there. But it would not be a scholastic reading inventory where we get a reading level on a student. That will not be considered a dyslexia screener.
I just love that you included the, that was gonna be my question, and you put it on there, 4 to 6 and 7 to 12. Just like if you do have a student now, or especially since things continue to change, there are students who have dyslexia who might have, things weren't the same as they were when they were K1, 2, right? So to make sure that people are trained and they're still getting those supports, and it's not just focused on K to 3.
Right. And I didn't really bring it out in here, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more in the afternoon tomorrow. But one of the things that like Learning Ally and Uzella does is it accommodates, because we always want to make sure we're teaching students to read and be adult readers and to be independent readers. But also, we also know that reading is laborious for children and for adults who don't have fluent reading skills, but they have adequate reading skills. And so we also don't want to be in a situation where we're so focused on a fluent reader that we forget accuracy is okay. Slow and accurate is not a bad thing. And so we want to have accommodations for our adolescent readers that make sense. So using an Audible as an adult is a fabulous strategy. Why wouldn't that be okay for an adolescent reader? That's what Learning Ally is. Learning Ally is the Audible for kids.
Thanks for doing the cliff notes of it too, right? Like reading the whole thing, I was like, got it. Oh, I hope so.
I think in some ways the bill acknowledges the great work that's happening amongst teachers, and really what we see is this wonderful alignment across primary grades and also vertically to include other grade levels, which is what we've been really focused on. Is how do we dig deeply and have these wonderful conversations and learn together. So lots and lots of great work happening in the buildings with us.
I know when I first saw the visual, the threads on the far left of it, it just seemed very clear and visually descriptive of how the process works, how you build a foundation that sort of enables this. Because even love of reading at 10th grade and beyond can be impacted by some of these building blocks or whatever not being in place and the challenge associated with it. So I was always curious in the chart, kind of talked about some of those pieces too, how we share this or even make parents aware of some of these realities, such that when we're trying to say, oh, I want my kid to be a good reader, kids do it, the school's doing its part, but just the way that parents partner, kind of with the process, or to even know what a good foundation looks like for reading. It just seems very, wow. When I saw that, I was like, oh, I wish I knew that like 8-9 years ago. So
even like in the communication with parents, like having, if there's tips that parents can do.
That's part of the requirements, but I think we go beyond the requirement, and I do really like the boxes. That's why I keep pulling them out. I like the box about being an early, there's even one about preschool that I didn't put in there, but in that literacy manual. And I just think it's really powerful to look at the importance of what it takes to be an adolescent reader versus an intermediate versus that kind of primary reader. And just having that conversation. I know like Sandy and Jen having those conversations during conferences about being realistic about reading skill sets.
Does turning the closed captioning on while you watch TV help?
for someone with dyslexia.
To help with reading, period.
Because of how rapid closed captioning is, it's pretty difficult to follow through with that often.
And then we put the digital clock right next to the analog clock.
All right, well, I thank you.
Lots of
Thank you very much.
information. Thank you.
Lots to be learned here tonight. All right, we're gonna go on to the board committee reports. The finance committee met this evening.
Great start.
We're not gonna talk finance just yet.
I was just sitting there like.
Okay, finance met at 5:30, and would you like to update us?
We, as we do at every meeting, we reviewed our salary and benefit analytics. Salary and benefits are about 85% of our general fund budget, so we always just take the opportunity to make sure we're on track with our projections. And we are, we didn't have any variables to report. We also took a look at our final settlement for property taxes. Property taxes is our most material revenue source, at about $11.5 million in property tax revenue, so a big chunk of our revenue comes from property taxes. And now that we've received final settlement, it's always helpful to just look back and monitor where we've come from in terms of our collection, since we started with levy collection when we passed our last levy in 17, we started collecting in 18, so we just took a little journey through property tax collection. And then we also did another review of our short-term debt. On the agenda for the board's consideration tonight is entering into a short-term debt opportunity to be able to pay for the high school phase 2 and 3, but now we're just calling it phase 2 project. And just understood in terms of permanent improvement fund revenue and the debt service payment, and then also reviewed the other debt components of the district, just to make sure we had an understanding of our overall debt picture. We do have some debt expiring in the next couple of years at the high school, and then the middle school debt is pretty far on the horizon in 49, so that mortgage is a long way off. But we do have some high school debt expiring, and then we have some general fund debt expiring. So we make sure we understood where those were before we, just so the board felt comfortable with issuing the short-term debt tonight to pay for the high school HVAC project.
Right. Yeah, it was a very positive meeting. The reports are looking good. Citizens advisory, of course, we have the group tonight. The other two groups will be at the April meeting, and I believe you have a meeting coming up, though. I want to just note that, April 5th, okay? Going to move on to Superintendent Committee Liaison reports. Start with the Belonging Committee.
I'll just share a quick update. We recently met again, and we continued in our 3 work teams. Our work teams are focused on looking at the student discipline data. We're trying to analyze our student discipline data, and it actually connects to the CAC report here today and how we can have conversations around student data. Another team is looking at curriculum resources and reflecting on whether or not our resources mirror our student population. So they're doing some work with that concept. And then the other team is focused on communication strategies that really share the vision and work of the Belonging and Inclusion Collaborative.
And you, this will be, you're about to kind of turn the corner and start looking ahead too, right?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to identify really what an end goal is for this year for those teams, and think about what the plans are for next year. And so we have spoken a lot about operating like the CAC team does, knowing that this work will continue past this year, but trying to be specific about what some of the targets are for this year, and then think about those longer targets. And so that's the goal to get to hopefully in May. We'll have a better idea of what those end targets are and then to do for the future.
Community engagement, anyone want to?
I'll go. WSMA had their music festival Friday. So fun. They pushed it to the spring because of COVID numbers. And so if for those of you who have not been, it's just so wonderful. I said it as much in there, like feel emotional. You hear students all playing
Wonderful
strings, and
night.
you're in person again, and you know, you go around, they divide you into the groups, so you hear people singing, and then they have a jazz band at the end. You're all gathered together in the beginning and end, and then kind of divide into your rooms, and it was lovely. They did a great job. And then last night, some of us were at School Foundation, had their distinguished alumnus, who I know also came to speak in the school today. But just as a community event for that, I think it's awesome that the School Foundation does that. You recognize a student who was from 1971 and talked about his music career. And it was just really neat, and grateful to the School Foundation too for everything they do and everything they donate to the schools. So those were two very recent ones that we're grateful for and very fun.
Anyone else want to add?
Middle school musicals this week
Middle school musical system?
on the island, Friday 7, Saturday 3 and 7.
Anything
I
else?
just spring break in the news.
Oh, spring
Yes.
break.
Giddy up there.
Yeah.
I'll make note of spring break, yes.
Back to snow.
Right. Yeah. All right, thank you. Planning and goal setting, we're going to kind of update you on the strategic plan. We've actually met once a month for a while now.
Right, yeah.
And I think after a lot of conversations, some things are beginning to gel, and we've actually divided up into groups. And the groups are tasked with, actually sometime next week, having a direction, an area where we're headed. So I, you know,
Yeah.
take over there.
Well, and so what I'll do is I'll share where the groups are now, and then just rewind a little bit. So right now, there's a focus on teaching and learning, climate and culture, and this is all
See
through
if
the
you've
lens
heard
of
this before.
right, and this is all through the lens of feedback though from our community members, our parents, from our students. And so even though you hear some same language, it's looking through a different lens, and the important lens of feedback. Social emotional wellness is surfacing as a critical component. Communication and financial stewardship continue. And so it all goes back to, gosh, 3 years ago, having conversations, community conversations, where we were just asking simple questions. What are we doing well? Where can we improve? And then what are the expectations for the district? That turned into a CAC study, which connected to previous CAC studies on the need for strategic planning. And it had been a while, the CAC recognized it had been a while since we've really talked strategically about a long-term plan. And so then that created the recommendations that came from the CAC study team that eventually turned into this work on a strategic plan. And so at this, with that work, it helped us to identify a design team that is made up of we have 29 individuals on the design team. We have staff members, we have parents, we have community members with no children in the school district. And that's the group that's having these monthly meetings. And they're tasked with really looking through the incredible feedback that we've had, again, from students, from parents, from community members. And we've looked through that the first glance to really help identify or affirm those areas. And now it's looking back to that feedback to identify what's the real work, what's the short-term work, what's the long-term work in developing a plan that helps to support student success now, but also, in 3 to 5 years when things might look different. And we know we live in a world that changes every day. And so that's the art of creating a strategic plan that can be flexible, but creating the roadmap, if you will, and the vision based on the feedback from our community. So we'll keep plugging away, and those teams will work on how to define those categories and future work in those categories.
And I didn't mean to be flippant. Yes, they are the goals, but we have added an additional one, social and emotional wellness, which we felt was a very strong goal that needed to be part of this whole process in terms of the strategic process.
Right.
The others are the same that you do know: teaching and learning, climate and culture, communication, and financial stewardship.
And then all wrapped in this conversation of what does excellence mean and what does
Right.
success look like for students? And so I think there'll be future work on kind of creating our own report card, if you will, for success and how do we continue to monitor that, and whether that's academic success or success in terms of, students' emotional and social health. So lots of great work to come even after the initial plan is developed.
I think for me, that's energizing is the base of people who are involved. You mentioned the broad spectrum of it, the look that's kind of fairly comprehensive, but with the future focus on what's not just needed now, but what's coming. I think there was a discussion also about innovation, so it's not been determined that will be kind of one of the pillars specifically as a separate thing. We're really looking at what's the way within each of these spaces. Are we aware of what's needed now and where we're going so that we don't become stagnant and decide, the world is done changing
Right.
and we are continually connected with what's needed, including that student voice and those kind of things. That's been energizing. As we started thinking through how would you land some of these ideas and some of these concepts into something that lives, I think one of the continual challenges for this and every effort like it is that whatever we come out with isn't a thing that lives on a page that's only in someone's drawer. And so the part you mentioned around how do we measure this, how do we keep this conversation happening, how do we get in touch with the cultural elements of our districts now and ensure that they don't just swallow up any of these wonderful intentions that don't live within that or get kind of expelled as antibodies, and how do we merge enough that we can transform where we are to where we want to be, but also just be mindful of those things. And so it's a really good set of discussions, similar to what we said earlier, looking at what's great, about where we are and how do you leverage that and what parts, can we learn from some other place that's doing something different. So that's good.
We had looked at some other strategic plans that other school districts have used. More than anything, we looked at the graphic, because there's got to be a graphic for us at some point to make this all easily understood. Yeah. And that's where we, one of the options we talked about was whether innovation needed to be its own goal or if it works its way through all the others. The other one we talked about was equity. And then there was some conversation about financial stewardship, but we felt that still needed to remain its own strong part of the plan as opposed to, because it does affect every single one of the other parts of the plan, but especially with some of the things we are looking at in the future, we really needed to keep that as a strong part of the plan.
So I'm on the board, so we know to say that.
Yeah, Ron, okay, so that, I wasn't even there.
That was a one-time instance,
Sure.
actually, on this board.
It was just one time, you got started.
The Financial Stewardship Committee is
I couldn't
Ron-
joke about it if it were true. I couldn't joke about it.
Rhonda, Jan, and I are holding up financial stewardship, and we are strong. All right, I believe that brings us up to date. Our work is not done, so we will still be meeting a couple more times, I think. And I think we had hoped by now to be ready to present, and I think that's a couple months off, and I think you can blame that all on COVID.
We had to press
Slow
pause
this
in
down.
the middle of the year. Yeah, a little bit, yes.
So, all right, next, the policy review. There's nothing to say except there's a meeting in the future. Student achievement.
She called me loquacious under her breath.
Anyway, student achievement was great. We met on March 24th and Ms. Klein shared middle school growth data. So we were saying how much we enjoyed primary school data and map testing and what that looks like for benchmarks and norms and really focusing on growth versus achievement, which was what we've been talking about a lot for years, about how are we helping every student grow, what does that look like, and how can we utilize the data. Middle school, sometimes I write such notes that I'm not sure what I was saying. Middle school decision rules, just the different, looking at math, the standardized testing, Ohio, the Ames math, different tier 1 interventions, but just the whole thing that we've been talking about this whole meeting, really, the culture shift of what that looks like, the culture shift of how are we looking at, maybe historically we looked at what students weren't getting, but how are we looking better as a school district on how teachers can either modify or look at what individualized differentiating for the needs of the students, but really how we can utilize the data that we've been gathering, especially over math, to be better and have a deeper understanding.
Those map drawings that were part of the packet you gave us, that show the growth, it is, I mean, fifth grade in particular stuck out to me as not having the kind of growth that I assume. Well, are you going for 50-50 growth? Are you going for?
So I'll speak to Devin and Tracy if you want to jump in too, because I'll share my knowledge of it, and Tracy will probably extend that. Math is created in a way, the assessment, and we've had conversations about the makeup of the assessment to understand. What we're trying to understand is what are realistic goals in utilizing that assessment. It's created in a way that roughly 50% of the students would meet their growth target and 50% wouldn't. And so what we're really trying to push for is to do what's considered a high growth, either grade level school or group. And that's when you're approaching around 65% of your students meeting their growth goal. And so
We're not there
what's
more
to
than
be-
just fifth grade.
what's to be expected is probably right around 50%, but we're talking now the conversation begins to identify what's the root cause, either of high growth or low growth, and trying to answer that question so that we can put in place strategies across grade levels and across things to really support students moving from one level to the next. And it was interesting, this goes into another meeting. In our district leadership team meeting, we received some feedback, and that's just feedback through some of our staff members who were whose children were having conversations with staff about goal setting. And so some really powerful conversations are happening between teachers, and this was from the middle school, between teachers and students about goal setting and how to talk with students about data in a way that feels safe for students, in a way that helps them identify what their strengths and what their next areas of growth are, to just move that target just a little bit. So that's a little feedback or a little background on the percentages that we see and what we're shooting for, but we're really looking for 60 to 65%, which I think Jean had shared that at the primary level too.
So, and Tracy
If
helped
you'd add
me
anything
too,
to
I'm sorry, with the grade level, like the math, the students that you were looking at were 43 kids who are on grade level. So it's a smaller portion of
Eighth
children.
grade band.
Yeah. Yes, so right,
That I
so to
expect,
remember that wasn't
That
all
one
the
is lower,
students,
yeah.
yes.
Right.
But fifth grade was low, both language arts and math. Was it? Even the fifth grade.
46% growth now, but
And this is for the winter quarter, is that right?
This is from fall to
winter.
winter, yes. And so that map actually identifies a target score for the midpoint of the year.
Yeah.
And so that's just for that first half of the year. It does not encompass the whole year.
What was it, so did we track kind of, I think we did, but like the growth for that period versus the year before?
That's what we'll be able to do. That the challenge is we're kind of resetting the baseline. We've been using MapNet for 2 years.
Will end our
Second year, but starting in a pandemic, it's a little bit of a challenge to understand perfectly what a baseline is. But yes, over time, you can track from year to year, fall to winter. You can track winter to spring.
Yeah.
You can track fall to fall, spring to spring. So you can look at it in many different points.
I suspect these growth numbers are going to increase, not, 80%, but looking at that quarter, we're, just coming out and then, there's this theory about masks and you learn that kind of thing. It'll be interesting to see what these numbers will be next year.
That's the beauty of utilizing this tool, is that we can watch it over time. And when we identify specific strategies that we're utilizing that we see high growth, we need to replicate those strategies. And it goes back to all of the things that we've learned from our primary and our middle school student achievement meetings and everything that Tracy just shared today.
I'll try to be less loquacious and share these comments. One thought that I had in response to what you said, Justin, I don't want us to just assume that it will fix itself automatically because of any set of things. I think when we looked at some data from our middle school over numbers of years relative to the growth indicators, maybe not been the right ones and all that, it's often shared that there's some things for us to understand well and then support the leaders and teachers in constructively challenging the students too. And I think one of the things I was most excited about with the elementary and the middle school was there's a shift in the conversation around what the data is, what the data is used for, how do you support people understanding it and taking the actions on it in a context that says we have to serve our students to sort of get more of them meeting what the growth goal would be for them, but it's not your issue or a statement that you aren't doing your job, teacher XYZ. If that's not the case, we want to partner with you to support that. We have to get to that point, so there's an urgency around it, but there's not an accusation. The intention is to ensure that there's not a conversation or a culture of accusation or something other than that partnership that supports it. And that was the part that was very encouraging for me to understand how the conversation is shifting, kind of in the schools from where we have been.
And then I guess another shift I see is bringing kids in terms of determining goals. That's not something.
Well,
Yeah.
and then to say that you were great at talking about that too. Some teachers might be a little more gifted with how to do that, or even if you think you're good at it, some children interpret that differently. So just that careful balance of how to encourage them on like to listen and where they could grow or where they have strengths without them interpreting it as like stupid math. Right. Like, just how that conversation looks and how to feel supportive of both teachers and the students.
Testimonial from the department leadership team meeting that we had later on a day last week. One of the teachers who has a student in, I think, middle school was highlighting their students' experience of the conversation with their teacher and talking about their results. And so the fact that there was a conversation that was specific and intentional and personal is like a win. And to the extent that we help people learn also how to do these things well and that kind of thing even more, it'll continue to enhance its impact. But I thought that was an example of some conversations we had on how could you utilize this opportunity with this data to have a meaningful conversation where the student is being seen, understood, and sort of valued maybe differently. And there was an example, one, kind of case where this person said to their parent, wow, this was great, and so it's progress, kind of in that space.
So kids have time to talk to students one-on-one during a class period. It's amazing that they even have time to talk to them.
We're looking out there at.
Yeah.
I don't really.
Exactly.
I mean, quite honestly.
45, 50 minutes, like,
Yeah. Quite honestly, for me, what happens is, you do a mini lesson with the students, and then you have an activity that they're either doing with a small group or they're doing individually. And while they're working on that, then you have an opportunity to conference with kids. And so it could take, like when I did my data conferences with my students in the fall, it took a week because you could do 5 or 6 students a day.
But the teams, they're being very intentional. I know there's a meeting tomorrow happening with your team and just pulling everyone together to be intentional about, how do we utilize data, not just in the language arts class, not just in the math class, but how do we share some of these strategies across the entire curriculum for these students? So very intentional conversations, and we'll learn a little bit, and then next year we'll learn a little bit more, and we'll learn a little bit more, and it's about watching those trends trend in the right direction as we really have shifted the focus. We still are mindful of achievement, but we know if we're moving our students, then we're going to be doing the right thing. So it's about growth. It's really about growth.
All right, thank you. We'll go on to the Board of Education report.
Oh, we mentioned, I was gonna say, we skipped facility, didn't we? But we also didn't.
Oh, I'm sorry, we did skip facility.
Just to say, we didn't
That was
officially.
Jeannie saying facility is not something at the end of that, right? She's the president.
No, and in fact, the facility has a report.
Just to go
About
back
the
and-
high school.
I think Tim has the facility report.
Okay,
We did have a team that did
I skipped it.
go back to review the work that's planned for the high school. And this is the work specifically to build a kitchen and a restroom in one of our special education rooms that supports the need for life skills work for many of our students. So we're excited about that. Again, that goes back to COVID relief funds that are going to be utilized for that work that will happen this summer. And it creates a great opportunity for learning for our students. So that's no meeting, but we're continuing to work toward that.
Things are happening, in other words.
Yep.
Okay, Board of Education report. There are 3 policies. These are policies that are in place at this point, and annually we have to review them, so there's no real change. If you've had a chance to take a look at them, you notice there was no verbiage that had been changed or turned to different colors. So basically, we are just reviewing and saying as a group that, yes, we did see these. Is there anything you want to talk about in terms of these three?
I think just wellness, I mean, we kind of had talked about, and the pandemic happened, and so we probably had
Yeah.
paused a little bit on that, but I could see how that really integrates with even some of the, like, when you read through it, I just didn't know where we landed, or if we did, if we were still on pause with that, well, like when you go through it, if there's that.
Well,
There's a call for a committee, yes.
yes, and so we've talked about this, and you'll see a strong focus on nutrition and physical education in this
Right.
policy.
Yeah.
But in our conversations, and Dr. Quattrone has been involved in those conversations too, we are really trying to build that to encompass wellness also,
Yes.
and mental health. And so we're going to be pulling that work into this committee that's developed, and we're working on creating that team before the year is out.
Interestingly
But with
enough,
all of those pieces.
in the policy, when it talks about the people who should be on the committee, it mentions mental health.
It does.
Right.
And
Right.
and social service people, so
Mhm.
it probably should happen.
Yes.
Yeah, it actually, as you read through it, it was more comprehensive lower down, I feel, than that last paragraph, than how it reads, I feel like, in
I
the
know.
beginning.
I know.
I don't know, I guess that was.
So we
my
thought
takeaway. It's
we
not
really
that-
need to make it work,
like if we're
Yeah.
improving
to
it.
support the work of our strategic plan ultimately. And so
Yes.
that's why we've added a big component of wellness to it.
Okay, so we will act upon that.
Mhm.
The next thing are those wonderful job descriptions. This would be our final read. So everyone has been through them.
I mean,
I have to admit, to the end, I was just trying to look for differences, only differences, right? Oh my goodness, there was a lot of reading there.
good job getting this.
Anybody have
Because you're
any comments, questions? Yeah, okay, fine.
But they're
we're-
aligned, I like that you said that before too, that they have a stronger alignment in language and updates.
Right.
Updates in that regard.
And they certainly have been updated. That was probably the biggest thing that we probably needed to do. Second thing is the calendar for 22-23. This would be once more second read. That's based on that additional PD day around the Thanksgiving break.
Just after November 28th.
Okay. May I have a motion to approve the Board of Education report?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. May I have a roll call?
Mr. Buckner?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mrs. G?
Yes.
Mrs. Zoller?
Yes.
Mrs. Broderick?
Yes. Thank you. I'm sorry, you can't see the person there. Sorry. All right, thank you. Treasurer's report.
Thank you. Item A, approve the minutes of the meetings on February 28th and March 8th. Item B, approve the statement of revenues and expenditures for month ending February 28th. Item C, accept with appreciation. We had one donation to a scholarship fund. Item D, the appropriation adjustments for March. And item E is the resolution authorizing the lease purchase financing for the high school HVAC energy project. It is not to exceed 2.8. The bid was 2.7 and some change, including contingency. And so this does include cost issuance rolled up into the price of the debt. We're going to capitalize that. And then also, if you remember, because this was a design build, we did have some savings at the end of the project on phase 1 of the high school HVAC. And so if that's the case, included in the resolution is that any funds can be used in the permanent improvement fund for any capital improvements for any of our buildings across the district.
Right.
So the resolution also appoints Densmore and Scholl, our longstanding bond counsel, RBC, our longstanding banker as a solicitation agent.
All right, and as soon as we approve this evening, you'll be able to go right to work then.
Yep. Okay. Yep, expect to have the funds in hand by the end of May.
Great, all right. May I have a motion to approve the treasurer's report?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Thomas? Yes. Mrs. G?
Yes.
Mrs. Zoller?
Yes.
Mrs. Broderick? Yes. Mr. Buckner?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, superintendent's report.
Okay, thank you. Several personal items. Number one is to accept resignation of one staff member. Number two is to approve a personnel change, and this just changes the work that this individual does during the day, the time that he is spending doing the different items there. Number three, recommendation to approve unpaid leave for these two. Number four, recommendation to approve winter athletic worker. Number five, home instruction, recommendation number 6, recommendation to approve pay for additional ESL instruction, English as a second language instruction. And then number 7 really goes to the conversation that Dr. Quattrone was having about the literacy bill and the supports that are in place. And so you can see there's a recommendation for 4 days of professional development or Gillingham training for these kindergarten through 2nd grade teachers. And number 8 is recommendation for approving that training for 3rd and 4th grade teachers.
Definitely worth mentioning is that we are taking our training with ESSER funds. So while we don't love unfunded mandates from the state, we are appreciative that we have ESSER funds to be able to support this work. Right?
I think this is a fantastic thing to know we'll have an entire primary staff.
Yeah, it's a big deal, and growing to the training at the middle school too. And so you can expect to see that too. And number 9 is a recommendation to approve kindergarten welcome day support from these staff members. These staff members are helping really to connect with families. We have 3 days set up here in the spring, and it's about making the best possible transition into kindergarten that we can. So it's supporting parents, it's supporting students, and it's supporting them and making that transition when school does start. Number 10, recommendation for a new van driver. And then switching gears a little bit, item B, we do have an overnight field trip. That is the marching band camp that you can see takes place at Bright State, July 24th through the 29th. And then item C is a revision to our contract with Scarlet Gray. And this is changed a bit because we've added 1 additional evening custodian to the contract.
There are no questions. May I have a motion to approve the superintendent's report? So moved. And I will second, and may I have a roll call?
Mrs. G?
Yes.
Mrs. Aller?
Yes.
Mrs. Broderick?
Yes.
Mr. Buckner?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Thank you. Superintendent's update.
Well, in my update, we talked about what I was going to speak to just a little bit, and that's Foundation Day. This was my first opportunity for a real
Great job, by the
Foundation
way.
Day. It was exciting. It was it was a fun weekend to think about the amazing students we have in our district. And so on Friday, to connect with our current students during the music performance was just phenomenal. And then you turn around on Sunday, and then today with Scott Harper coming in to speak to students, and you're looking at a 1971 graduate with 2 Emmy Awards is pretty phenomenal. And so we talk about impact, and we talk about our students going on to impact the world around them. What a great example. And to see those current students mirroring Scott Harper just within days was pretty phenomenal. So Scott's message today was powerful. And so I wrote down some of the key things that resonated with me. Art is not competitive, it's contributive. Dreams have no expiration date. And so, he spoke about whether it's now or in 2 years and 5 years and 10 years, dreams don't expire. So keep dreaming. And then he also shared that sometimes it's the last person standing that is successful. And what he meant by that is don't ever give up. Keep moving along and be that last person standing. Keep working and pushing toward your goals. Powerful message. It was a lot of fun today. But that's why we've got great kids.
It was great.
Yeah.
He brought some of the, he writes the movie music or National Geographic specials. I think he brought some of the music and our new sound system in the auditorium. Just made it fantastic. Oh, it was, wow. A double thank you to the foundation. First for the new stuff that's in the auditorium, and second for bringing Scott in. All right, thank you. Is there anything else? Then in lieu of adjournment, we're going to move to executive session to consider the employment of public employees. Yeah, don't try to leave. You take a minute. All right, thank you.
Yeah, you need a.
May I have a motion to move to executive session?
Thank you.
May I have a second? May I have a roll call?
Mrs. Aller?
Yes,
Mrs. Broderick?
She's on the way.
she may be on her way.
Mr. Buckner?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mrs. G?
Yes.
Go for it.
No, I can get it.
Can I get some water?